All right, we'll get started here on our third session today, Russian Narratives in the War Against Ukraine. First up, we have Roman Osadchuk, who will be speaking on Russian disinformation campaigns against Ukraine during the full-scale invasion. Roman Osadchuk is a resident fellow at the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab. His research focuses on disinformation in Ukraine and neighboring countries. He is the author of multiple investigations of disinformation, influence campaigns, and computational propaganda, which uncover the tactics and techniques of malign actors. He is also a PhD student and senior lecturer at the National University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy, where he teaches undergraduate and graduate level courses on propaganda effects and open source investigations. Previously, Roman received an MPA degree from Syracuse University's Maxwell School on a Fulbright scholarship. And after Roman, we will have Nataliia presenting on how to conquer and surrender cities with the Russian world idea, the case of Odesa, Ukraine. Nataliia Steblyna, a professor of political science in the Department of Journalism and Social Communication at the Donetsk Stus National University, presently relocated, teaching journalism, graphic design, and media analysis. She also cooperates with the Institute for Democracy as a media analyst. Her fields of expertise are Ukrainian regional media and Telegram channels, as well as Russian propaganda and digital media. She has written books on digital instruments for media analysis, how Russian opposition media covers Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and the politics of digitization in the context of transformations in the modern world order. First up, Romane, proszę.
Hi all. First of all, thank you very much for organizers for inviting me here. It's a great honor and pleasure to be here with you today. A quick remark, I am non-resident fellow already, and now I'm representing Let's Data. It's like Ukrainian startup, but I'm still teaching and PhD students at the Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. That's important. Okay, so today I wanted to talk about the Russian disinformation campaigns against Ukraine during the full-scale invasion. Of course, on this topic we could write, I would say, a few books, so it definitely wouldn't be like comprehensive overview of everything, but there would be like 3 campaigns that I worked on myself personally, that I'll describe what are the main patterns, and then I'll try to tie them up to you so that you understand that they are connected and what's happening there. So let's start from the basics. Modern Russian hybrid war started a while ago, right? So we already talked and discussed in this room yesterday and today that there have been a lot of different things happening since 2014 at least, even if not before. By the way, this is a chart that we created with a team for the report that's called Narrative Warfare, and it's based on the data from the Stop Fake website. That's basically all of the debunks that been there separated by different topics. So this is data from 2014 till the end of 2022. And here you could see like how they basically been disseminated, like what journalists at Stop Fake debunked and at what times, and when there is like intensity in different topics. So some narratives are being like stopped for a while and then like reintegrated again. So here we could see like the patterns of like how Russian propaganda machine works. So that's just like to show you that it's not new. But then something changed in this life, and it's what? And it's full-scale invasion, correct? First of all, what happened is that multiple traditional ways of disseminating disinformation for Russians kinda not ceased to exist. In some places they did, but like they kind of became harder to use the older means of communication like RT and Sputnik in multiple countries, or TV channels like 112, Zik, and some others that were blocked in Ukraine. So Russians need to switch to something new, social media platforms. So they reoriented towards, as I said, social media. So here is really important node of spreading disinformation is social media grifters. Please raise your hand if you've seen the Twitter account with the blue check mark spreading some nonsense. Have you seen with that? Yeah. So that's the grifters, because if you didn't know that, people with the blue check marks, if they receive enough reactions, shares, and comments, they can earn money. If it's for you like discovery, yeah, basically people are making money on nonsense. And ex-RT employees and bloggers. So that's important because some of the people who left RT, they're active in blogosphere, they're spreading the messages, even if they're not directly associated with RT, they're still pushing the Russian messaging. So more covert tactics that exploit platform vulnerabilities, we'll talk about like doppelganger and a few other things. The main idea is that they understand that there is not absolutely ideal systems of how to check and like counter certain operations on the platforms, and they're abusing it. Laundering of the fringe websites and personas, we'll talk about this as well, but namely, imagine something starts on Reddit, and then somebody picked this up and claims, hey, this is like legitimate thing, and then it reaches the mainstream media. So that's the main idea of what they're trying to do. Ad campaigns, basically paying to reach out the audiences like the doppelganger, we'll talk about this in a second. And real-life campaigns, aka active measures. All of this technically could be actually part of the active measures, but what I'm meaning here is that maybe you've heard about the coffin in front of the French parliament, like the coffins with the French flags, symbolizing that if you send like French soldiers to Ukraine, they would be dead. Kind of like that. So here's an example. This is RT journalist pretending to be, an expert on everything. And she is claiming that Zelensky is actually filming all of those videos from the presidential administration on the green screen from Hollywood. So so-called green screen theory. Or, as I said already about the coffin mystery, and there's like Russia has a link because they paid people to do that. Maybe you heard about the story that Elena Zelenska supposedly bought a Cartier bag in New York during her visit. I'll remind you real quickly that it started from the supposedly employee of Cartier shop. Spoiler, she is living in Russia, not in New York, and cannot work at Cartier in New York. Like, it's kind of hard to track, but whatever. Let's talk real quick in general what disinformation campaigns were in Ukraine. So the throw in the pasta, I heard yesterday this phrase. Actually, I call it like throw as much as you can and something will stick. It's from the Firehose of Falsehoods. It's really a seminal paper by Rand Corporation written in 2017, I guess. It still holds. So the main approaches are simple. Amplify internal issues or clashes or grievances. Create clashes between leadership, political and military. I do not even tell you which specifically, you probably already know. Undermine trust in institutions so that like the government doesn't represent you, these people are detached from you, you shouldn't be believe in them, etc. Spread demoralizing content that you already lost, do not fight, just give up. Exhaust information space with different theories, usual like with MH17 and afterwards. And weaken the resistance, right? So like try to people to stop actually resisting towards Russians. Platforms, Facebook ads, like doppelgangers and some negative content, we'll talk about this. Telegram influence operations, forgeries. I've never seen so many forged documents as I've seen since 2022. Like Polish MFA, Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, Ukrainian government. They were all like, I wouldn't say that they're like done a great job in faking them, but they were believable at least. So TikTok, we'll talk about this in a second. I wouldn't be stopping here for long. It's like one of the largest, it's actually the largest influence operation on the platform that we uncovered. And the Twitter, right? Negative content, troll accounts, and grifters as well. So here's an example of one of the ads that I tell you. So you could recognize whom you see on the picture. It's Valery Zaluzhny. Now it's ambassador to the UK from Ukraine. The message there written that Zelensky fired a person who was the head of Center for Counter and Disinformation because she was doing a PR campaign for Zaluzhny, which is like absolute complete nonsense, but still they paid money for it, they created the graphics and they disseminated it. Who cares, right? So in the West, the situation is slightly different. The main idea that Russia wants is to win the war. So the message is, the main narrative, what they're trying to peddle abroad is focus on your internal problems and do not help Ukraine because you have internal problems this and this, or Ukraine is unreliable, corrupt, or Ukraine wants to drag you to war, and you do not want to be in war, so do not help Ukraine. Another kind of thing is that Russian resources are vital for your survival, so do not do anything weird, or you will like freeze out in the winter or something like that. Approaches that they've done. So the information laundering I already mentioned. Place something on the fringe, wait when it makes it till the mainstream or being picked up by media or bloggers. Constantly provide an evolution of the narrative. So this like one of the research that I've done, it's how they implemented the narrative that Ukraine sells Western weapons that being provided by Western countries, and then they built it, updated it so that when the Israel-Hamas war started, they claimed that Hamas is using the weapons that Ukraine supposedly sold to Hamas. It's a real story. It's being debunked for sure. Right? It's fake, right? But they still use it and like constantly update this thing. And the real life operations, so like coffins or like the graffiti of Stars of David in Paris as well. Platforms, so the doppelganger in a second, and celebrity endorsements. Maybe you've seen celebrities are claiming that Volodymyr, you should go to rehab, you should start abusing some drugs and alcohol. That's the thing. They basically paid through the Cameo. This is a service when you could pay an artist or like well-known actor to do some promotional video for your friends, like congratulate them with the birthday or like ask them to do something. And they done it for certain Volodymyr, but what the Russians did, they put the @Zelensky, claiming that those stars supposedly asked Volodymyr Zelensky to stop abusing substances. And the Twitter, right? So like blue ticks accounts, as I said, some of them are directly translating like Russian Telegram into English or other languages and spread it straight away. Or some blogs, fringe media, so like from RT Pool and some others that are being disseminating the information as well. So here's an example of actually how one of the TikTok campaigns ended up on Twitter. So there is a user sharing the made by Russians video, supposedly claiming that Ukrainian Minister of Defense bought the villa for his daughter in French Riviera. Spoiler, he never did. This, you could buy it for 7 million euros if you had them. Let's jump into the operations, because I've been kind of talking about them, but not necessarily writ large. So Operation Doppelganger, if you don't know, this is like pretty long operation, long-standing one, that the main idea is to create the believable copy of the website. It's actually exact copy of real media, but push the information that you need, supposedly written by the journalist or by this media. They used different operation security methods, including geofencing, meaning that if this website was intended for, let's say, American audience, and if you're going from, like, let's say, Canadian IP address, you will not see it. That's the geofencing. So they used Facebook ads, Twitter X vulnerabilities, and also now they switched to the Blue Sky to promote their content. They not only cloned the websites, but also spread demoralizing content. So here's a few examples from Le Parisien. This is articles that never existed on this website, but they wrote them, they even created collages. Unfortunately, I do not speak French, but I Google Translate them and they are not positive. So that's what I know about them. Here is a Ukrainian example. It was in Ukrainian, but I Google translated the image, so that's why many images would be featuring English text for you, but like they were written in Ukrainian. So this is Union, like this collage, and like should Zelensky return or not? Please bear in mind that this article was advertised on Meta platform, right? So on the Facebook. And this is like forged Washington Post, how it looks like. So this is the real Washington Post journalist. This is like it looks like Washington Post, but it's not. This article was never there. Or the Fox News. US should trade Ukraine for security. Yeah, interesting kind of concept that was written on August 7, 2023. So how it looks on the Facebook side of things. So this is one of the ads that's been demonstrated to Ukrainians. Again, I Google translated. So this is a meme that like cashier asked that you're an optimist, claiming that supposedly Ukraine comes for another like tranche of credit money from the Europe, and they are an optimist because Europeans will not give us money, something like that. The geofencing, as I said, like if you go on the website from different IP address, you would not see this website. You would see some nonsense text, but if you go on the source code, you could see that there is like specific script that does that. Then they switched it, so now you cannot even see the script. It will do something a bit more sophisticated. If you're interested, I could tell you, but I will not be stopping it here. But still, if you're coming from like the website that you're not intended audience, they would basically refer you to something else. And here are a few examples from different countries. So on the left, you could see this is like Italian ads. Some of them are like, let's spend more money on public health rather than helping Ukraine, or let's not send our boys to die in Ukraine. French people are crazy if they want to send their kids dying in Ukraine. We should not be doing that. The short description of what you could read them if you read Italian or French. And on the right, this is an ad on Ukraine that there's a huge corruption on building the railway station, so it's bad, we should not believe in government or something like that. Switching to a new things that I investigated, it's TikTok campaign that happened in 2023. So we together with BBC Verify published an article. We uncovered several hundreds accounts. TikTok confirmed and banned 12,800 accounts, disinfo about Ukraine on different languages, and there were actually 7 languages. All they collectively had 847,000 subscribers. Usually it's where like these empty accounts with like single video there. Usually it's AI narrated video, so it's like a few images and AI narration that something happened. We'll talk about this in a second. Use popular hashtags and try to hide that they are actually Russians, but TikTok confirmed that they are. So typical scenario was that they were targeting political or like local leadership or military leadership in a typical scenario. So here's a photo of an official. So in this case is Reznikov, former Minister of Defense. Here's suppose like villa or like some luxurious item. It might be car, it might be villa, it might be something else. And then finally, this is like our government is bad, or like Ukrainian people are suffering while the people in power are like making money and everything like that. So here's a quick snapshot of this video of the villa of Reznikov. So if you reversibly search it, you could find that this property is still for sale. It's not being bought. The image of the account is like stock image, so it's been stolen, and this received 1.8 million views on TikTok only. It doesn't end there. How do we know that this is Russians? So there was an article by Washington Post when they got leaked documents from Russian dashboards, and this dashboard showcased a video of some Ukrainian military person. And I've seen this video when investigating this campaign. That's the first thing that I could tell you. And the second one, if you read the affidavit of the recently Department of Justice of the United States and FBI, they've done this interesting thing, and you could read the Russian internal documents, including this dashboard. So that's how we can understand that first they are tracking what they're ingesting, so they can measure the effectiveness of those campaigns. That's definitely their produce. So that's what we could confirm. Remember 1.8 millions, and remember this Twitter snapshot that I showed you? Well, it received 2.3 more million of views. So in total, it's 4.1 millions of views. And I'm not even saying that these things were like translated in multiple languages as well. Because of the AI, like in Twitter, you could add some specific bot and it will translate you a video. And it got even more views. So it's not even like cumulatively all. I think you could imagine how many users with blue ticks shared this with what sentiment, claiming that Ukrainians are, I don't know, corrupt and everything else. You could only imagine. And the final thing in the campaign that I wanted to discuss is like one of my last investigations when I done Due for Lab with the team is that we collected 100,000 comments from malign actors. Some of them are being like coordinating. They were like inauthentic. We were using a Ukrainian tool called Osadchuk for that, and we found like that 15 most prolific accounts published about 3,600 comments in October and November only. So how it usually look like? It's some unnamed accounts, so these are the comments on Telegram. They are like claiming that Zelensky is ready to do anything. If he cared about his people, he would go to negotiations, but he rejects any opportunity, which already says a lot. These are two comments that are exactly the same and go after each other. So it's definitely like an authentic behavior right there. So what they're spread in Ukraine, basically they are criticized political military leadership, that Ukraine was abandoned by allies, government prolongs war for money because it's profitable for them, and asking questions why there is no peace. So like these two campaigns that it's only a shame that West only promises but never delivers the help. Why my family should suffer. Again, Zelensky is not interested in peace and only in his financial welfare. So these comments were like repeating again and again. On the Facebook situation was somewhat different. There were like accounts in batches that were used for a short period of time and then absolutely like abandoned. They usually were active for one day for like 15-20 comments and then absolutely abandoned, as I said. The tactic is usual comment or meme under public persona or media page in hopes to get at least some views and reactions. And comments do not correspond with the content of publication. So it means that there is like either a script or like real person goes like, okay, I have this text to paste and I go to these links and I just paste it there. So here's an example of one of the comment sections. Dana Warova sharing the meme about Syrsky and Mariana Bazula, criticizing them both. Here's a USAID Ukraine publication and two comments out there. So this is like, I just made a preview of these comments that published this. So it's just like blurred profile pictures. So one of them is saying that why the couple of Zelensky is not stopping the war. And the second one is like, how long can we fight the war? Twitter situation is like even crazier than that. So it's meme and comments. So here you could see one of the accounts, more specifically media files that this account spread. So these are the memes that usually go in batches of 10 or 5 in this case, meaning that it comments under the 5 different Twitter posts with one image and then comments with 5 or 10 others on other posts. It looks something like this. So this is about the statement of Budanov that Irina Farion died for Ukrainian position. Here are a few comments, like two memes about Zelensky and Poroshenko. And here, if you go to the media file, you could see that this is like skittled work. There's like definitely an algorithm how this account works. So it's highly predictable, highly understandable that there is something going on. Remember I said that all of this connected in one way or another? So here is one of the accounts, and you could see here is an image of like skeleton with the like butterfly wings, and it tells like sprint demobilization, so it's basically criticizing demobilization, as you understand. And then at the Operation Doppelganger, the same image was used on the Facebook, meaning that there's like the same people from the same office using the same visuals. Again, I do not know and cannot prove that they're sitting in the same office, but they definitely have the same link of the like resources that they're using for their campaign. So most likely they are being connected. And here's the text of this ad: is that like Germans saying that like we're not as protected as we used to be, so like there would be no demobilization, something like that. Ukraine will lose, basic idea. So my main conclusion is that there might be different campaigns. They might be targeting different platforms. And like, yes, as we yesterday discussed, there is a clash. We need to understand that what Russians do, they, first of all, really know their audiences, whom they are targeting, with what content. They also trace how well this content does. They done it like and adapted to different platforms so that it looks, native to those platforms. Thank you.
I styled my presentation with a joke. It was told by President Zelensky in a Netflix show. It was about two Odessa Jews who met somewhere near Privoz. It is the famous Odessa market. One says to other, "What's up?" And the second says, "They say that the war is going on, Russia fights with NATO, 800,000 Russians were killed, tanks destroyed, and so on and so forth. And what about NATO? NATO hasn't even come." In this joke, Russian narrative about Ukraine and Odessa is perfectly reflected. And of course, I get that it is like a joke and it is nothing serious, it is ironic, but what people can learn from this joke about Odessa inhabitants? The first one is totally crazy, because the joke was told in December 2022, and he doesn't understand that it is, and this war concern his country and his city. And the second one just spread pro-Kremlin narratives about Russia fighting with NATO. I want to show how this Russian colonial narrative about Ukraine, where Ukraine or Odessa in particular does not exist without Russia, is represented in the regional perspective. And additionally, we will see whether any counter-narratives were formed by Ukraine. As far as sometimes in Ukraine, Odessa is also reflected as something strange, special, and not Ukrainian enough. Let's start with some historical context. I'm not a historian, but we will need two dates to understand how Russian colonial narrative about Odessa was formed. According to Russian, as well as local Odessa discourse, which is mainly spread by local authorities, Odessa is 231 years old. However, the first mention of the town and the port in the location of the modern city of Odessa was in 1415. So Odessa is more than 600 years old. How could it be? Mainly for a city, it is important to be an ancient one, especially when you have some evidence. However, for Odessa, it is not the case, as far it is in the middle of Novorossiya narrative. Novorossiya means New Russia, or Wild Fields narrative. According to this colonial narrative, an empire always comes to some new lands or wild lands and civilize these lands. And all the evidence about former people, cultures just vanish. I think here in Canada this narrative may be recognized as well. So in 2014, when Russia decided to take Ukraine by force for the first time during Ukrainian independence, Novorossiya narrative was actively spread. Russians were ready to take Odessa as well as other cities on the east and on the south by hybrid means. In 2014, in Odessa, we saw some strange men in jogging suits with sticks or even guns, representatives of the so-called anti-Maidan. In May 2014, they were given a task to overthrow the Ukrainian government institution and to take Odessa back. However, they did not succeed thanks to Odessa inhabitants who chose to stay with Ukraine. In 2022, there was another attempt. However, this time Russians were going to attack with warships from the sea, and several military units were supposed to advance from their ground. As a rule, and someone mentioned that today, that Russian military aggression comes hand in hand with information war. That's why Novorossiya narrative about Odesa being a part of some new Russian lands conquered with glory in 18th century was spreading massively through different platforms. Along with politicians, Russians use their artists, bloggers, polittechnologists. They all repeat just one thing: Odesa is Russian, Odesa must be liberated, there won't be any peace in Odesa till it be returned to Russia. Thus today I will be speaking about this fake Novorossiya narrative, which is used to justify the war and its constant transformations between 2022 and 2024. To fulfill this aim, Russian and Ukrainian media was studied, RIA Novosti, Telegram channel, the most popular, as we heard yesterday, in Russia, and Ukrainska Pravda, which is one of the most popular media in Ukraine. I used computer-assisted analysis as well as narrative analysis. According, as we know, according to the narrative theory, people believe in narratives but don't believe in facts. And when it comes to Russia and the narratives it exploit, so-called Russian world should be mentioned. I consider it to be a ground narrative of their soft power, and of course you know that it related with Ukrainian imperialism and colonialism, and its goal to prepare the inhabitants of the so-called near broad to reunite with Russia, to be conquered by it, and so on and so forth. Before the full-scale war, this narrative was about that Odesa will be surrendered without a fight, and Russians were hoping to get Odesa with Crimean scenario. You can see here messages which were spread on different platforms, even on the Zelensky, President of Ukraine, official website, and on different media and Telegram channels. So the city is not prepared for defense, there won't be the war at all, the brothers won't fight with each other, and so on and so forth. And I want to stress that this narrative differed from Kyiv will be conquered for 3 days narrative. In Kyiv, northern and central Ukraine, Russians expect some resistance, but not very strong. When it comes to Odesa, they did not expect people to fight at all. And here you can see how often RIA Novosti mentioned Odesa between 2022 and 2024. It is like a constant attempts to find the matching key for the city gates. For instance, in October, November 2022, it was fixated the highest number of mentions, about 35, 36 mentions, so almost every day. What about the most popular topics? So the most popular topic seems to be a neutral one: explosions, war operations. But it is not neutral, because Russians reported about some strange explosions in Odesa, for instance, about electricity cuts and blackouts in Odesa, but they didn't mention the cause of it. So it was like, inhabitants of Odesa hear explosions. What is the reason of these explosions? Neutral, but it was extremely incomplete. And if we speak about the second popular narrative, it is about destructions of Ukrainian military targets. And I hope you know that when Russians mentioned the destructions of Ukrainian military targets, it is usually about some residential building hit by Russia, or hospitals, or churches, or something like that. Of course, Ukrainian Nazis, it is the third popular narrative, because Russians want to stress that of course, Odesa inhabitants, they want to be with Russia, they want to be liberated, but why didn't it happen? Because of Ukrainian Nazis. On the first place is Ukrainian diversions. Why they use definition diversion? Because like they can't say that Ukrainian military fight with Russia, and they trying to show that some saboteur groups are trying to mess up with Russians and strong Russian army will conquer Odesa. All these topics seem to be very different. However, mixing false and truth information, suppressing truth, manipulating Russians try to fulfill several aims. To cover Russian war crimes in Odesa, to blame fake Ukrainian Nazis or Ukrainian military for people suffering during the full-scale Russian invasion, and additionally to show that Nazis suppressed Russian-speaking people, and of course to create an impression that Ukraine has already lost the fight, Russians will come anyway, and of course they are trying to show that true Odessa inhabitants are impatiently waiting. Let's see how are they doing that. So it is like my first figure where you can see three narratives and you can see how dynamics of these narratives. So at first, how Russians tried to cover war crimes in Odesa. At first, they were trying to report on destructions of Ukrainian military targets. And for instance, when on April 23, 2022, Russia hit a residential building in Odesa, they were like underlining that it was Western weapon, it was not a residential building. For instance, later, they understand that this narrative maybe didn't work because it was possible to see that people were sharing pictures about the destruction, so they were looking for another tactics, and in 2023 they just decided to report that it wasn't a Russian missile, but it was Ukrainian missile which hit Odesa. And an interesting phenomenon was observed in 2024. In March, foreign leaders visited Odesa, so Russians were trying to frighten them and shell the city during the visit, and they reported these visits along with strange explosions in the city. Then they report about destruction of Ukrainian military targets and the Western weapon. And when Greece Prime Minister visited Odesa, they quoted Dmitry Medvedev, who said, "If we had wanted to kill the Prime Minister, we would have done it." And here you can see the examples of RIA Novosti text and news item from 2022. Residential building was hit, stressed that it was a military target, and a news item from 2023, the cathedral was hit. Russians said Ukrainians did it, it was Ukrainian missile. And a piece from 2024, when Russians were trying to show Western leaders that they are the real masters in Odesa and they can do whatever they want and can kill whoever they want, even Greece Prime Minister. As for the diversions narrative, we can see a clear difference between 2022 and 2024, when this topic was popular. At first, Russians were trying to interpret attempts of Ukrainians to defend themselves as some kind of diversions of a small number of Nazi saboteurs. However, afterward, it wasn't so popular because if we speak about some diversions, not organized military resistance with numerous people who consciously fighting with Russia, it is hard to explain why the saboteurs are resisting for so long. So they changed their story. Now they are constantly reporting about some Russian underground helping Russians to fight the Nazis. And here you can see some examples. At first, several Ukrainian diversions seemed funny, like Ukraine confiscate Moldova wine for the armed forces. And then some diversions were used to cover actions of Russian army, like Ukraine mined the Black Sea, and so on. And their diversions were also used to justify attacks on the civil infrastructure. On the other side, Russian diversions in Odesa were created by Russian propaganda to show that there are people in Odesa who wait for Russia and are ready to fight for it. In these messages, true and false information is mixed. For instance, the leader of the underground said about 30-meter fire in Odesa port. Of course, it wasn't true, as far as no one in Odesa saw it. Here is attention to the topics Odessa is Russia, Nazis in Odessa. This attention was constant, and of course you heard about biolabs. This narrative was covered only at the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Odessa is Russia narrative was spread with quote of Russian appointed officials, Russian politicians, Putin in particular. As for the narrative of Ukrainian Nazis, threats to Ukrainian language, culture, some evolution was observed. At first they reported about strange and dangerous Nazis who do not let Odessa inhabitants to host Russia in their city. In 2023, Great Russian Culture Destruction topic was used. And in 2024, they celebrated the 2nd of May 10-year anniversary. How to deal with that, and was it possible? If we speak about Ukrainskaya Pravda, it is used some counter-narratives, but they weren't among the most popular topics. And there was a small number of anti-fakes on the news feed. The counter-narrative about Odessa fighting back, resisting, was popular only in March 2022, and after that Odessa was showed more passively, suffering because of Russian attacks. The active angle was used, but not so often. Western help to Odessa was covered mostly after the large Russian attacks, and the blackouts weren't continuously followed in 2024. It was also not very good because Russians spread narrative about Odessa being abandoned by Kiev, and sometimes they even wrote that other Ukrainian regions stole Odessa electricity. Here you can see examples of active angle used in March 2022 and the passive one used afterward. One more problem is the reliance of Ukrainian media on the topic of crimes in Odessa. In 2023 and 2024, this topic dominated. And if we analyze the most frequent words in the topics, we will see corruption and mobilization subtopics. Among almost the same approach which we observed previously. And on the level of local news, there is a constant attention to the topic of economics and leisure. Thus, what is a picture of the local life in Odessa like? Odessa inhabitants make money and steal money, swim in the sea, enjoy sport, do not want to serve in the army and defend their country. If we analyze the news about culture, we will see that mostly the topic of Russian culture is covered, whereas the topic of Ukrainian culture is less popular. And one more aspect. Along with that, we observed constant mentions of Russian diversions in the city, when cases of treason conducted by local inhabitants are covered. For the conclusion, in the beginning of the full-scale invasion, Russia propaganda in Ukraine and Odessa as well was mostly perceived as a kind of joke. Plenty of memes about dolls propagandists was spread on the internet. However, Russian propagandists were persistent. Of course, they weren't able to cover their war crimes conducted in Odessa and other cities entirely, but in some cases they succeeded in erosion of reality and truth undermining. For instance, sometimes in Odessa it is possible to hear that Ukrainian military should be blamed for the shelling too. It was also interesting to observe how Russia reported about its war against Ukraine without mentioning the war and Ukraine. It was precisely what Lavrov said several days ago. Russia does not shell Ukraine. So yes, there are some explosions in Ukrainian cities, but Russia has nothing to do with that. Thus, Ukrainians should be blamed for the war. That's why the propagandists constantly promote the narratives of the city suffering because of Ukrainian Nazis and foreign mercenaries. This topic was sometimes used in Western press when Western journalists, some of them actually of Russian origin, covered the topic of derussification of Odessa. Russian narratives were extremely flexible. The narratives were constantly adapted according to the events on the front lines. Analyzing the Ukrainian media, we can see some weak points. Yes, Ukrainian media was able to create some counter-narratives, but the narratives were mostly used at the beginning of the full-scale war. At first, media was closely monitoring resistance in Odessa. Lately, traditional regional topics were popular: crime, leisure, etc. Some local news even played along with Russian propaganda, corruption, forced mobilization, and so on. The counter-narratives about Odessa being part of modern Ukraine were rare. Changes in Ukrainian strategic communication to fight Russian propaganda is needed. The Russian narratives about Ukrainian regions should be taken into account to increase effectiveness of counter-narratives creation and dissemination. And some photos from Odessa for you. Thank you.
Дякую, both of you. Питання, прошу.
As a person who's also from Odessa, I have a question. As far as we see, Russia have a narrative about Odessa being a piece of the Russian world. How pro-Ukrainian citizens who live in Odessa can combat that, even if our mayor is pro-Russian and he's a well-known Russian citizen and he still fights for keeping Pushkin and Catherine II statue in the center of Odessa? What we can do to combat that, and what we can do to make Ukraine finally like Ukrainian city and be the last pieces of the Russian culture out of there? Thank you.
Thank you for this very complex question. When we speak about Russian narratives, we should understand that there are different narratives. The one is like Russian official narrative, and the second one, which you mentioned about Mayor of Odessa, Trukhanov. As a rule, these people think that Odessa neither Russian, neither Ukrainian. It is something like something by itself. Of course, it is extremely hard to fight this narrative. I think that we should continue to share images of Ukrainian Odessa, because it is true. For instance, we can recall that numerous Ukrainian writers like Taras Shevchenko, Lesya Ukrainka, Ivan Franko visited Odessa, and for instance, for now, it is still no monument to Lesya Ukrainka in Odessa. And the Ukrainian community is Odessa. Just you get it. So Ukrainian people in Odessa, they are trying to fight for this monument. Local authorities in Odessa are not very happy about it, but still on 24th on February, just 2 days from this conference, there will be like a gathering of Ukrainian community to promote this topic once again, and it would be like fundraising campaign for this monument. So I think we should be creative, we should be persistent, we should use Odessa cats to catch attention, because Odessa cat is like a meme. For that, we should remember that Odessa is actively fighting against Russians, and you can see it is like coffee, this Moskva worship described. We should use images, should use memes, and should continue our fight. That's all that I can say for this question.
I was quite interested with the conversation we were having in session 2 about kind of digital warfare, and tying a little bit to what both of you mentioned about resistance here. And so I kind of wanted to tie a little bit both of these together. This is maybe a conversation that's a little difficult to have. Difficult because the information is so limited, and I'm referring to kind of the activities in the occupied regions of Ukraine. In your experiences, how are Ukrainians in the occupied regions engaging in combating disinformation as a form of national resistance? What initiatives, much like how we heard with Stop Fake, what initiatives exist to achieve this? In other words, how are civil society and other organizations throughout Ukraine empowering those in the occupied communities to combat disinformation, if those exist? Thank you. Дякую.
It depends, of course, if we speak about occupied territories. Of course, it is extremely dangerous for people from occupied territories to read this Ukrainian content, and their phones may be monitored by special forces, and of course, it is they can come to prison and be tortured and killed. But the survey, which was made by Internews in Ukraine, they reached people on the occupied territories, and they asked them about their visions. I just can share you the link, and you can read their findings. You mentioned like communities on the occupied territories. I don't think that it is like a relevant term, because of course if we speak about occupied territories, people are extremely frightened to unite and to discuss some topics, media literacy or something like that. So just read this research, and I think you'll get your answers. Thank you.
I'll add really quickly. There are some initiatives that are working on how to reach out to those audiences despite the blockings of Ukrainian media and etc. without the VPNs and other things. Not necessarily like about the fact-checking and media literacy, because, well, you cannot run a training on media literacy in occupied territories, right? It's like impossible. You would be, killed, arrested, whatever, and other horrible things. But at the same time, I think one of the issues is just reach with the content, and that's what some of the Ukrainian medias are doing in reaching out to those people, just to try to provide alternative version of not that being promoted predominantly on those territories. So this is part of the media literacy, but not traditional way of like how to discern falsehoods from truth trainings, but rather like to promoting the objective information that could be done from objective sources.
My question is about the journalists who are less obvious, but that are active here in the West, and that may be cited by some bloggers in Ukraine. We have our experience with a journalist who was not as obvious at first, but was quoted by bloggers in Ukraine with a Russian narrative. And then that journalist's article was repeated here by journalists who will write something about that journalist and then cite a link to the article, which simply amplifies and continues. So, would it be useful for journalists to have a tool in which journalists who are not as obvious are nevertheless rated in a way so that someone could look, either a blogger in Ukraine or a journalist here, to see this is what that person has written, and here is how what they wrote or she wrote cross-references to the Russian narratives, but maybe in a slighter, softer way, to be careful.
So any lists are bad, white lists or black lists. So I'll explain, because it always could be portrayed as like censorship or something, that you're like trying to silence the journalist if you put him or her into this list. So the better way is just to do due diligence before you providing a comment to the journalist, right? So you're like researching who he or she is before providing a commentary. I understand that it's sometimes really hard, especially like if you never heard about the outlet or something, but it should be done. And like any public list, it always could be gamed, right? If we consider that you're creating it, it will never be up to the time, because there are like new people are coming and going out of the like sphere and on the top of the issues that I just discussed before. So it's better never doing this, but it's rather how the journalist or the person who like interviews you frames the questions, what they're doing, and then if you see that your like words being like changed or like traversed into something else that you never said, like publicly denounce it and debunk it afterwards. It would be far more efficient than lists, because again, there is no guarantee that people will consult with those lists as well. So there are like a lot of problems with lists. I will not go this way. Hope it makes sense. That there is no easy fix, unfortunately.
Just by way of context, we tried what you said. In other words, we knew this journalist was aiming with the kinds of questions this journalist was asking. We knew exactly what they were going to write, and we had no way to stop them. And then when the articles came out, they got amplified by people who would not check to see what this journalist wrote. And by then it was too late. We found a new way last year, which is to say when that same journalist approached us with new questions, we knew exactly where they're going to go. We gave our answers in a public forum. We gave a public forum in social media where it would be seen. Here's our answers. And that way the journalist could not distort any further in the next article that they wrote. We're just trying to see how we can help others who will not do their due diligence to stop citing these kinds of journalists or giving them interviews, which will then just give them credibility, which is what happened in our situation.
Funny story, like kind of related. You know who also responds publicly to the questions and requests from media? Margot Simonyan. When there is like credible media asks her about something, she goes to her Telegram channels and just sends them off, like uncensored way, but like on her Telegram channel. It just reminded me, but it's not connected to her situation. It's funny coincidence.
Romane, can you tell me what is some of the greatest challenge that you have in the research that you've been working on? What are your biggest obstacles?
Stay sane? No, if you think seriously, yeah, I'm like, the people who are working in this field, like of counter and disinformation, like fact checkers, like an analyst, they're all like, most of them, I cannot say that all of them, but most of them are like neurotic type of the people who are like reading and getting into this, and like they have pretty bad outlook of the world. So I would say like not staying the same, but not getting polluted by this information. Like when you read a lot of the stuff that's been like toxic by itself, it's extremely hard sometimes to stay positively outlooked, because I can tell you 100 times that it doesn't influence me, but it certainly in some ways does, especially in the longer term when you do this like for a long period of time. So we should acknowledge that and understand that we should not fall for this like, I don't know, depression hole, I would say, like while reading this news, because reality is different. Like information, of course, that we perceive in like manifests itself in reality and like could create our reality if we believe in it. But the thing is that the world is much more robust and like wider than just the comments on Twitter.
I have a question for you too. So in your presentation, you were talking about how narratives have to be stronger than fact. So if we're dealing with disinformation and wrong narratives, how do we sort through and how do we get to fact?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think that we need also a catchy counter-narrative, but based on facts. We just disseminate like facts on social media, especially for young generations, especially, it won't be enough. I think that for Ukrainian media, and even now, it is very important to create narratives about fighting back. Because, for instance, when Odesa is shelled, I sometimes can see like the marks from the missiles. So I know that our air defense is protecting our city. So our military just do their job. So it is a reality, it is a fact. But unfortunately, when we speak about media, we usually see only this passive angle. So I think that it is very important for us not only just to disseminate facts, but create interesting, catchy narratives, as it was previously said, not only for some mass audience, but for small audiences. We should understand the Western people, not like the Western people, like the mass audience, but we should understand that there are different people with different strategies, with different interests, and we should propose these narratives based on facts.
When you mentioned that you could see that the Russian trolls, so to speak, they also had code that could measure the effect of what they were doing. Could you elaborate a bit more on that? Is it because they want to know if they're directing their messages in the right way? If you can see something from the code, if they're trying to measure how effective it is, because that's one of the big dilemmas always. You don't know if you're actually having effect when you're distributing misinformation.
Thank you very much for this question. Indeed, you never know how effective your campaign, right? So like in, I don't know, say in some commercial things, right, when you advertise the product and people are buying it, you kind of can measure it. In information operations, it's like a thinner line. You definitely cannot say for sure. It's not a code. It's like what we got is just some intercepted internal Russian documents that provide screenshots of the dashboards. So it's basic dashboard, like it is Russian internal presentation that when they screenshotted some kind of their internal software that showcases how many views specific videos received, how many comments, like reactions, interactions. So they are measuring how popular they were by checking what specific like messages were like the most, I don't know, used and liked by people the most, right? Separate thing, if you go deeper in those documents, I never discussed it in the presentation, but they are like separate department of the SDA, Struktura Digital Agency, if I remember correctly. They actually monitor information space and try to come up with an ideas of what to inject into information space. They are like working together, right? So there's a department that does produces content, like messages and cartoons, whatever. One analyzes what would be effective, and another one would be measuring how well those messages done on different platforms, why they are doing it. Of course, to understand whether they're efficient or not. But on the other hand, we need to understand that it's being done on behalf of Russian government, but not by Russian government necessarily. So there it's like, sure, people that are heading this company most likely are going to Kremlin for like some debriefs, but they are not like employees of the Kremlin necessarily. So like the trolls that are logging in, they are definitely not sitting in the Kremlin itself. This is subcontractor. So they are using these numbers to get more money from the Kremlin to run more operations, most likely. Again, it is all of these are assumptions. We cannot neither prove nor disprove them, but it seems logical because these things is the governmental contract most likely. So that's what they're trying to do with these dashboards. They do not it's for internal use. So this is their internal documents that we only got a glimpse of because they were leaked.
Nataliia, in your presentation, you slightly mentioned cathedral, Transfiguration Cathedral that was bombed by Russians in 2023. And I really want to talk about this, extend this. We know that Russian Orthodox Church is actually a really big supporter of war, obviously, right? Patriarch Kirill, the head of Russian Orthodox Church, is making a lot of comments all the time. Not only him, but all officials. It's kind of interesting because he was the one who actually concentrated that cathedral in 2010 that was blown by Russians 13 years after this in 2023. And his comments about the destruction of the cathedral was, "I am saddened by this, but Ukrainians did this, obviously." But for me, question would be, we know a lot that Russian Orthodox Church is doing to dismantle Ukraine. They might try to disinformate people, especially the shepherds, about this. My question to you would be, do you feel a threat from Russian Orthodox Church in terms of disinformation? And kind of to both of you, do you use official websites of Russian Orthodox Church when you are studying disinformation, or do you actually just toss it out?
You know, Russian Orthodox Church is like this first guy from the joke about NATO and Russia fighting. This guy didn't understand in December 2022 that it is Russia who wants to destroy him, his city, everything. Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine is something like that. So they see everything. So even their own cathedral was bombed. So they could die there, but they still trying to repeat all this Kremlin narrative. So of course they are a threat. I support intention to deal with them because of it. But it is not so easy because on the regional level they have their influence. And recently, for instance, our head of our region, not our major, but head of our war administration, he said Odesa was saved in 2022 because of attempts of our religious leaders who just prayed for Odesa very intensively, and this is also was a reason for Odesa to be saved. So it is an extremely complicated question, and of course they are a threat.
I would just quickly add to this, not necessarily the websites of the Russian Orthodox Church, but definitely what they're doing. And so for instance, when the Tomos and the introduction of Ukrainian Church was made, and its development continued nowadays, there are also here and there the narratives that it's not legitimate, that Ukraine tries to destroy the church, so it's against their freedom of religion and speech and everything else. So it's been used and instrumentalized. And of course, Russian church, I mean, you've probably seen those images of Pope, Christianized military weapons and tanks and whatever, and this military cathedral of the Russian MOD was being Shoigu canonized on the wall. They are definitely an instrument, but it's they're one of the institutions, right? The Russian MFA, Russian media, or something else. It's just one of the pillars. So definitely.
And I think I've got a Zoom question, and if we can squeeze in one more, I think there's one more question on the floor. Proszę.
Of course, so this question is coming from Ihor Stebsky. Were you able to see responses to specific Russian taunts or propaganda aimed at the Odessans? And the question is for Nataliia.
Maybe these pictures can be the answers. There were pictures, street art of Odessa cats who describe as military guys who are trying to defend Odessa. So maybe it is an answer when common Odessa people just are trying to create their own story with their own art and so on and so forth. So of course, after every attack on the city, Odessa people just want to create their own story, and they try to share it abroad, and it is very important for them to be heard.
My question will be to Roman. Thank you for showing this doppelganger leak document. Have you been trying to match narratives presented in this leak document that we saw in Afterbeat with the actual posting on this doppelganger site, everything that the social design agency have been doing online? Did that actually matches? Because we see some research from French authorities about RRN and other platforms, but I'm actually curious, did they match?
So in these documents, if you go at the affidavit, they set the objectives of what they want to achieve. So like what are the main objectives of the campaign. So it's like, and they coincide. So like my first slides is that they were based on like undermine trust in leadership and Ukrainian institutions, introduce clashes, etc. They based on the previous experience and not necessarily on doppelganger, like in the documents of the SDA. And surprisingly, they overlap pretty greatly. So the main like ideas and underlying targets and objectives that they are trying to achieve, I would say they are the same among all of those different campaigns. And then doppelganger, portal combat, operation overload, they are like working on different subsets of different tasks within the same domain. So the main general objectives are the same, basically win the war, right? All other things is just like they are just focusing on a particular part of this thing. So it's either to overwhelm journalists, like Operation Overload, doppelganger just like sow distrust and negative information, and some others like do additional tasks within this whole domain to win the war, right? So I would say they are overlapping. And again, most of these operations, it's deliberate division. We do not even know whether they're different or not. So like it might be just, I don't know, another person sitting in the same room and we're calling it like different operation in the end. We cannot prove or disprove it, right? That's the problem. But all in all, they are using the same guidelines and the same like objectives and goals.
Щиро дякую. Романе, Наталю, дякую.